Well, hey, Richard, it's great to finally meet you in person. How are you?
Very good, Calvin. How about you?
Yeah, doing well, thanks. Yeah, we're out here today out at my ranch. So it's a place I always enjoy being at. So, and yourself, where are you at today?
So I'm in Midtown Toronto, and we're just coming out of this third wave, and we're still working from home quite a bit. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, but things are opening back up. My team's in the lab, and I go in. I'm starting to go in almost once a week now, which is crazy because I used to go in five,
Yeah.
6 days a week, right? So, and where
So,
exactly is your ranch?
so my ranch is located just east of Drumheller. We're at the base of the Hand Hills here. It's the ranch consists of about 1,440 acres of mostly native grassland that has been around here for thousands and thousands of years. We did have 140 acres of cropland on it, but a little bit after I took it over, we seeded it all down into a combination of native and tame grasses. So we're all 100% grasses here right now. So it's a pretty cool country. I love this. I've had this ranch since 2008. It's got deep coulees and creeks running through it and rolling hills and lots of biodiversity. We've got so many different plant species out here. We've got lots of wildlife and and just really, really enjoy the time that I get to spend out here. And of course, I'm running a business at the same time. And so I value this being out here for sure. Yeah.
Well, you've got me beat. I've probably got a quarter, maybe an eighth of an acre, but I do have a little plot of tomatoes I grow, and I collect tomato seeds from friends and even
Oh,
scientists sometimes around the world, and I grow my own heirloom tomatoes, which are just
oh.
about to start coming up. So I do enjoy my little bit of gardening.
And I don't know if you do any research on vegetables and plants and things like that, but I know that, homegrown tomatoes, they just taste so much better and they're more flavorful and more nutrient dense. I mean, there's such a difference from them and the store-bought tomatoes, eh?
Yeah, I've got to meet some tomato scientists who are into this, and
Okay.
and this is probably like a microcosm of what we're going to end up talking about. But it seems to me there's the commodity tomato that you go into the grocery store and it's round and red and it's
Yeah.
hard and you can
Yeah.
throw it in a shopping cart and it doesn't bruise. And then there's these little ones that are hard to grow. They're fussy. They get
Yeah.
infected, but the skin's very tender. They're hard to take. They're almost made to go from your backyard to your table, right? And the
Right.
flavors, they're meaty. They're unbelievable. They're
Yeah.
such a difference. But it's hard for people to grow them because they're
Yeah.
fussy. It's a bit of a risk, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. So you're a neurolipid chemist. So can you give me a little bit of background on, how you got into the studies and how you came along to be where you're at right now?
Sure, sure. So, as a younger adult, I was interested in sports and nutrition, and I kind of figured you'd go study the two of them together at a university, and
Right.
realize pretty quickly nutrition's its own field. So I went and studied nutrition for a while. Really fell in love with the kind of the biochemistry part of it.
Yeah.
Did a PhD in that area. And then towards the end of my PhD, there was a lab in the US at the what's called the National Institutes of Health that invited me to go do a fellowship in the brain. And we really got into brain metabolism. And people don't realize this about your brain, but it's almost as fat as your body fat. There's just
Right.
a ton of fat, lots of those omega 3s all in your brain, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I got into that and I really enjoyed it. And I guess it's 15 years ago, I got a job at the University of Toronto and set up a research program.
Okay.
And we've been focusing on questions related to brain metabolism, and it integrates nutrition. I'm in a nutrition department, and how your
Right.
body gets fats to the brain, and how all this kind of works.
Wow. Fascinating, eh? So much to
Yeah.
learn, and I'm sure you're learning so much all the time now.
Well, it's one of the fun things about being able to run a lab is you get a team of people doing their PhDs or fellows, and
Right.
they're asking questions that we really don't know the answers to. So every 6 months or so, somebody comes into my office or now on Zoom and sends me like, here's what happened. And sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we have no idea what happened. But that's how research goes.
That's a process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. How long have you been in ranching?
Well, I grew up on a farm. I've been, my whole life as a young adult. I was on a farm, and late 80s, early 90s, we ran into a lot of challenges. We were on a mixed farm, and, grain production was really tough at that point in time. And so I ended up having to move to the city and got a job there. But I had some cattle, and I've always been involved with cattle from that time. And I'd come back and forth to my parents' farm, on weekends to take care of the cattle. And in 2004, that's when I had an opportunity to buy this ranch. We had rented some land down in this area here, and from the owner that had this land, and I just fell in love with it. And I said, hey, if you're ever looking to sell it, I'd love to buy it. And so we came to an arrangement to purchase it. And I've had this land since 2004. So always been in agriculture, raising cattle, and we've just kind of changed, our shift the way we raise them is basically all that's happened. So
well, I took a look at your website, and some of the hills are absolutely beautiful. In the pandemic, I took up jogging a little bit, and I could just see you running through that. That would be great.
Oh yeah,
it's absolutely beautiful out there.
Well, the invitation is open to you. Anytime you come out to Calgary, I'll make sure we can shuttle you out here, and you can go for a run, and I'll go along with my side-by-side or my mountain bike. How's that?
that sounds great. That sounds great.
So how did you get involved in, the correlation between grass-fed beef, fatty acid profile, and that? I mean, I'm going to take a guess here, but was Mark Schatzer involved at all? I think you were friends with him. Is that right?
Sitting at my desk one day, and, we've got web pages, and, we do stuff for the media sometimes. Yeah. And I think he emailed me, and then he called me. It was a long time ago, about 15 years ago. And Mark was doing research at that time for a book called Steak. It's a very simple title. I love the book anyways. I'm not trying to plug him. It was really good. But he hit me with a question because he knew I could study fat. And he was, he's saying, I got some steaks. Can you analyze the fat content for him? And I said, I don't need to do that, right? Like, go to the USDA website, the Canadian Nutrient File. Right. We know the fat composition of beef.
Yeah.
Nice talking to you. Good luck with your book, kind of thing. And he said, well, wait a second. My cows eat something different. And I don't think I can get that information. I said, well, what are they eating? And he said grass. And, it kind of hit me as so, I'm a scientist, right? I'm not a farmer like you. So I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Right?
No. Everybody thinks all cows just eat grass for the most part, don't they?
So he was grass, and it turns out I think he was giving this one cow apples too and stuff. So we analyzed it. I was a bit surprised, if not shocked. And there was a literature out there. I just didn't know it. You know what I mean? It wasn't my thing. But the in fats, you've got these omega-3s and omega-6s. And my colleagues disagree a lot, but they say we should, the ratio of 6s to 3s should be about 5-1. People disagree on that number, but somewhere around there.
Right. Yeah.
When we analyze commodity beef, the stuff that you can buy on the shelf, it was about 30-1. And his steaks, from my memory, were 2-1.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. And then, Mark, he's an author who's writing a book. So he pushed this hard, and I got to go to his house and have dinner and eat these steaks. And I was kind of blown away. It was really good meat.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. And here I was sitting there with things like animal products and beef not really being on my radar, from omega-3s in the brain to like, wait a second, this could be done,
Right.
Kind of a perspective. So we since then we've analyzed probably hundreds of samples.
Right.
We see that massive trend in the omega-3s versus the omega-6s in the products.
Okay. Well, that's really, really cool. I mean, Steak, that was right when I was starting my business. The book came out, Steak. We were launching our business, I think, the year after he came out. So that book was really influential. I found it really fascinating, the fact that he traveled all over the world and, was doing this research. It was pretty cool. And it had some, information to back up the reasons why we were doing what we do. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's interesting. Back in 2000, 2003, I would sell some, beef to my friends and family. And at that point in time, we were still confining the animals to feedlot. We were feeding them grain, and I was selling it as hormone and antibiotic free beef. But I wanted to kind of, at that time, I understood that omega-3s was really important to our overall health and that. And so I went out and I purchased a bunch of sunflower seeds and incorporated that into the diet of these animals, and in hopes to see what we could attain from, omega-3 fat content. But back then, so I did that, and I couldn't find a lab or anybody to test it to see whether we were able to change that, fatty acid profile. And I think at that time, I wasn't even considering the ratio between omega-6, 3. It was more, omega-3s were really important. So can we get that up there? And, after sampling the beef, it just didn't taste very good. It was really fishy and didn't have a good flavor and that kind of stuff. So are you saying that it's more the ratio that's more important than the omega-3 content? Like, is that it?
I think they're different questions.
Okay.
To some extent. I look at the grass-fed beef in kind of two perspectives. One is if I'm going through a store and I have a lab and I can analyze these things, and I want to test which ones are grass-fed beef and which ones are maybe mislabeled.
Right.
If I were to do that, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio jumps out as an easy way to do that, because it's 30-1 versus 3-1. It's a big difference.
It's huge. Yeah.
In terms of the nutritional values, beef doesn't have a lot of omega-3s, and when you add grass feeding, it jumps up a bit. But it's not a salmon steak or something like this. But it's a little difference. And the big problem I have, or the big, people criticize me when I say that, they hear me say that grass-fed beef has more omega-3s, and I think it's interesting. And I think they're missing the point that nutrition is not about a steak on a Friday night, right? Like, it's great. Go have a ribeye on Friday night with your friends. Yeah. It's nice. But it's about all the little changes you do. And the grass-fed beef was kind of a gateway drug or gateway food, if you can say it, for pasture-raised meats in general. Right. You see these trends and some bigger trends in chickens, pork, then you got your dairy. And I think when you put the whole package together, that's where I get really interested nutritionally. The idea of changing one thing in your diet one day, it's nice. If you feel better about it and you enjoy it, go for it. But if you want to make a difference, it's the whole step forward, right? It's a big step.
Well, just bringing awareness that if, a lot of the commodity beef is 30-1 versus 3-1, and you just get in the habit of focusing more on pastured meats, how you can really bring that ratio down, and also how you start making choices on other foods to have a lower ratio as well, eh?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because, and this is anecdotal, but when I used, there were farmers here that I was getting my meat from. Sometimes I go to a farmer's market. And when I buy one of these pasture-raised products, whether it's beef or something else, I kind of celebrate it a little bit. So, I buy something green or bright colored to go with it. And, if you could have a friend over, and it's a bit of a feast, and it's something you enjoy. And I find the whole meal gets better. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not like you're having a burger and you're going to have a soft drink and fries with it. It's like, well, this is a pasture-raised piece of meat. I'm going to maybe open a nicer wine tonight, or
right.
I'm going to get some tomatoes from my garden, and like it changes everything, which nutritionally is really complicated, but I think the psychology of it is good. It's it's teaching people you enjoy the cooking it. It's almost more spiritual, if I can use such a word, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you talk about these other dynamics coming into play. I remember I had the privilege of seeing you at the Organic and Holistic Conference in Leduc in 2019. And by the way, you know how to pack a room, because everybody was waiting to get in, and there's people standing and sitting on the floor. You did a great job of your presentation. But one of the things that I remember you talking about, the peppermint. You remember talking about, peppermint?
Jelly beans, probably.
Jelly beans. If you want to explain that, just to illustrate that it's not just our taste buds, or just not, our tongue that we're experiencing food, but like you talked about the psychology aspect, but also this is an example. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I think people make a massive mistake, and a few listeners here are going to step back and say, "What's this guy talking about?" And they
Yeah.
think that we taste food flavor with our tongue.
Right.
We don't. You get salt on your tongue, you get sugar on your tongue, and a handful, bitter, and a handful of other things, sour. But in reality, you smell food and you smell it backwards. So it's that classic reflex where everybody's had been drinking water and laughed, and the water comes out your nose, right?
Yeah.
And that's not so you don't drown when you're laughing. It's in reality when you're chewing your food, that airflow is coming back across your nose from what you're chewing and swallowing, and you're smelling it, but you think you're tasting it. Your
Right.
brain pulls a trick on you. And so the way to do this is take a peppermint or a jelly bean, block your nose before you put it in your mouth, and chew it and chew it and chew it. And then at some point when you're about halfway done, open your nose. And when that smell comes backwards, it just hits you, right?
Right.
And it hits you. And then what's really neat about that is the omega-3 in grass-fed beef, in grass in general. There's a few types of omega-3s. It gets metabolized and it contributes to those flavors. So that's one of the neat things about grass-fed beef is it's got a different nutritional composition, but it's got a different flavor profile.
It sure does. Yeah.
And you're actually smelling it, but you think you're tasting it. It's a really neat phenomenon. And by having that increased omega-3s, even though sometimes it's not a lot, it can really change the flavor profile. I don't have to tell you about this. I'm sure you've noticed it quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's I found that very interesting. That's very cool. So tell me, what is in the grain that is given to the animals, or is this something have you worked with probably a animal scientist who you need to know what happens with the grain that changes that nutritional profile of the meat and the fatty acid profile?
So there's a couple of things going on, and I'll oversimplify it a little bit. Actually, you can probably help me answer this. People use the word grains to mean a lot of things. One thing it can mean is corn, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it turns out that corn it's almost all full of omega-6s and almost no omega-3s. So if you're looking at omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of corn, it could be up to 200, depending on the variety.
Oh, really?
It's off the charts, right?
Yeah.
So when people start feeding corn and these other grains that don't have a lot of omega-3s, you get this higher amount of omega-6 and lower amount of omega-3s. Grass, and I've went through the field, and we'll have to chat about this a little bit more. But it was it was a very embarrassing moment for a neuroscientist. I went to Blackview Farms, and I said I was going to analyze his grass.
Right.
He's a grass-fed farmer here, and I looked down at the grass. I was going to be really stealthy. I was watching what the cows would eat, and then trying to predict where they're going to go. I was going to go grab it. And I looked at the grass, and it's a forest down there, right, of different types of grasses and different heights. And I was amazed with it. So I grabbed a bunch, took them into the lab and analyzed them. And not to get caught up in the math, but usually we talk about the omega-6 to 3 ratio. I was saying 4 to 1, 30 to 1, or 2 to 1. Yep. In grass, it's 0.3, which means there's actually more omega-3s than omega-6s. And I should talk about an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Grass is full of omega-3s. So it's a combination of not giving them the corn and giving them the grass that allows the animal to stretch this out. And then, I'm interested in omega-3s because that's what I can measure. But grass is really neat because it comes with a lot of antioxidants, beta carotene, and all kinds of things in it. And I don't focus on those just because I really can't measure them. Right. You get those all going into the animal as well, and they serve as antioxidants. And, I think that helps contribute to the flavor profile.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe it was something to do with the starch in the grains that was causing this effect. Because, when you give animals high rations of grain, it increases acidity level in their rumen. And that, I thought maybe it was that change that really took place that was a function of it. But I had no idea that their omegas were that high in grass versus, grains.
Yeah, grass isn't a fatty food, right? It's lean, but the omegas that are in it, and cows eat a lot of food, right? I don't know how much grass does a cow eat a day. Do you know?
Well, they'll eat about 3% of their body weight. So 1,000 pounds, 1,000 pound animal, 30 pounds. So 30 pounds of grass is a lot, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so grass isn't very fat, but when you start eating 30 pounds of something that's not a lot of fat, it starts to add up, and it makes a difference in the animal in
That's
that
yeah.
respect.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. Can you tell us anything more about what your research is finding and that?
Yeah, so we started doing this with Mark, and then largely out of convenience, speaking to some local farmers and people Mark knew and
Yeah.
analyzing their things for them. And then eventually, with the Alberta group, they sent me a large batch of samples, and we analyzed a bunch of things. And this pasture pattern tends to hold true across species, everything.
Okay.
And not to poke at beef, but some animals do better.
Right.
So the omega-3s in beef are largely what we call alpha linolenic acid, or ALA is
Okay.
one type of omega-3. Whereas
Right.
in chickens, you can start to get fish oils from the pasture. So the longer chain omega-3s. And then pork's a little different depending on how they do it. And you get this whole hodgepodge of these things. And it's been really neat to see. Even geese, there's not an animal that's an exception. If the grain and corn comes down and the pasture time goes up, you get a higher omega-3 content of these animals. And the big question I've got, or the study I'd like to do in the future, I would love to do a study where we replace all the animal products in somebody's diet with pasture-raised animals. So again, not just the steak on a Friday night, but everything.
Right.
The eggs, the milk, and do it for 6 weeks and start to measure like blood omega-3 levels. I'd hypothesize that they would go up, and this would be a good thing. But, I don't, as a scientist, we haven't done the study. I don't know the answer.
Do you think you could ever get to a point where you have too many omega-3s versus omega-6? Or they call them essential fatty acids. The 6 is essential as much as the 3, but can you get too much omega-3 versus 6?
So I think I can do it in a lab, but not in a human. And I say that because omega-6s are everywhere now in our diet.
Yeah.
Right? They're just flooded, and people don't realize it. I probably showed this slide at the time of my wife's breast milk, and it has a lot of omega-6s in it. Who cares? Well, I happen to do all the food purchasing in our house and all the cooking in our house, and I know this stuff, right?
Right.
And still, my wife's breast milk omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was about 10-1, and this was 15 years ago, kind of thing, or 10 years ago. And why is it? It's just because it's everywhere. It's just in everything you eat, and all, whether it's a potato chip or anything, it's all cooked in these omega-6 and all the processed meats and all these foods. So I don't think, in theory, you could get into the situation where you have too low omega-6s. The last case I know of was a girl in, I believe it was Tennessee, who had a gunshot wound to her stomach, and the intravenous feed they put her on didn't have any omega-6s in it. And she developed some symptoms. Or that was omega-3s. Omega-6s, sorry, I got my years wrong, was even before that. I guess what I'm saying is we haven't seen omega-6 deficiency in humans since I've been alive.
Yeah.
Just because it's absolutely everywhere, at least in the North America. So I'm not too worried about it. I think it'd be nice to see if we push the omega-3s up a little bit in our foods, what kind of health benefits that could have.
Right. And have you checked, what's the difference between buying nutritional supplements that have high in omega-3s to increase that ratio versus eating whole foods and, pastured beef, et cetera?
I get in a lot of trouble for this comment here, but this is my take on it. People always say, well, I'll just take a supplement. And that's fine if the omega-3s are the good thing. Sure, there's an argument to be made there to some extent, but I don't like it. I worry that these supplements enable bad diets. And people say, I don't have to eat fish. I can just take a supplement. I don't have to eat fruit. I can just take a supplement, and I can get around that stuff. And we were talking a little bit about a nice pasture piece of meat and the enjoyment of the meal and the other things you'll have with it. And I worry that the supplementing gets away from that. And the idea is eat food. We know food works. And try and eat, little healthier meals all the time. And I think that'll be really additive. I worry about the supplement saying, well, I can have this fast food because I'm taking a supplement, right? I'm being a little extreme with my argument, but I think people, if started to enjoy these meals, learned how to cook them a little bit better. Cooking grass-fed beef's a little different than conventional meats,
Right. Yeah.
and start to enjoy the process. It's kind of mindfulness, and then you're like, your big worry is, what am I going to have with my grass-fed beef tonight?
Right.
Which is very different than the stresses of work and how you're going to serve it and these kinds of things. So I'm a little tough on supplements. I think,
Yeah.
but I think it takes away a bit of the spirit of what we're trying to do with some of these things, right?
Right. Right. Is there some cuts of meat, for example, beef, that have higher, better ratios than others? Like, what about the ribeye versus ground beef, etc.?
For sure they do. And I don't know the complete answer to that, but there's differences in fat contents and all the cuts, right? And
Yeah.
fiber types and all these things. What we did, and it was really just to keep things simple. So, I had farmers showing up in my lab saying, "Can you test this for me?" And they'd bring me a cut that I didn't know what it was. And then I'd have to go to a store to try and find that cut to compare it to, right? Because
Right.
just
Yeah.
tell somebody a number, you got to compare it to something. So we
Yeah.
focus on the ribeye for a couple reasons. One is everybody knows what it is. It's kind
Yeah.
of a prize cut in the
Yes.
steak world. And that's important because the local Toronto restaurants were interested in this too, right? And they're going to be serving ribeyes at some of these places. So we focus there, but we see it across the board in all the cuts. It just varies. So an example might be ground beef can show up, maybe not as extreme. And sometimes it might be 20-1, not 30 or 40-1. And then depending on the blend, because there might be some organs in there or something, it might not go down as far or something like that. But we always see the shift. It's just the range. It doesn't always quite matter as much.
Okay.
Um,
Well, it's interesting. When I first started this business, when I started selling beef back in the mid 2000s, and that, it was still, fat was bad for you. We're looking for the leanest cuts possible. It was all extra lean ground beef that people were selling. So when we started, our business in 2012, people were starting to get educated and understand a little bit about the differences in that. And we were selling lean ground beef and extra lean ground beef. About 3 years ago now, once, the understanding that, fat is good for you on so many different levels, and that it's not the bad thing that we've been told about for so long. We've, keto come into play. We now have a regular ground beef, which was what was sold all the time back in the 80s, 90s, was regular ground beef, and now we coined it more of a keto kind of friendly beef just because of the fat content. So in that regular ground beef versus an extra lean ground beef, are we going to see a better ratio, or are we just going to see higher fat content with more omegas in it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. We can check, right? You send me some samples, we can check that. I'm guessing the bigger difference is going to be just the fat content. And then the ratios will be, they'll shift
Relatively
a little bit,
same.
but they're not going to be dramatic,
Okay.
but you're going to see this increase. But if I can follow up with you there, I'd like to probe you a little bit about this. How has the market changed for you in the past kind of 10 years? Is this an easier thing to do, or is it harder to do?
No, I think I'd say it's easier, maybe just because I'm getting more used to it. But no, when we first started, it was really an educational process. We started selling in 2012, just halves, quarters, and boxed packages of beet to, people in general. And then we moved to retailers in 2013. But those first retailers that we came on board with were mostly health food stores. So these are stores with highly, I say, educated people that, have done a lot of research and diligence, and they already had seen a bunch of research on pastured meat and understood what it did for the environment and that kind of stuff. So those first few years was really about educating the consumer about what we're doing and that. And the more that we got out there, and then along with social media, the change in, fat is good for you. Now there is more understanding and recognition about grass-fed beef. So we have moved more into conventional retailers now. So like we're in Western Canada in some of the, like Save On Foods and Sobeys and that, where back when we first started, we had no chance of getting into there because there just wasn't enough consumer awareness of the product that we had, whether, someone was concerned about animal welfare, whether they were concerned about, how we treat the environment and the impact of livestock on our lands and that, or the nutritional profile. It just, when we first started, it wasn't aware. So things are getting better on that. You see some of the larger chains now starting to talk about grass-fed, marketing grass-fed. So I see that it's moving more in that direction. And then also the talk of regenerative agriculture has been a big part of it. Environment, I think, is probably one of the key things that are at the forefront of us besides the pandemic. That's the talk that everybody's talking about. And as people cattle have had such a bad rap in terms of, their methane emissions and bad for the environment. And unfortunately, they've just taken a couple data points and extrapolated that out to say that, animals are bad. But when people really understand that they're an important tool for us to manage our environment, to mimic the way the bison used to come through on this land, and we're recycling the nutrients and keeping those nutrients back on the soil and land, that we're able to sequester more carbon and do all of those kind of things, people are starting to recognize that value. So I'm really hopeful that, grass-fed beef is going to become more mainstay, where there's a price differential at this point in time. And really it's a function of economy of scales. We just, from our smaller processors, we're not sending full truckloads. We don't sell container loads of product to different places. And so we don't have the economy of scale. And so you're going to find that, our meat is more expensive. I always said it would be interesting to charge not by the pound, but by the nutritional content of the meat. And you with your nutritional background, you've done some nutritional research, and have you seen a couple studies that I've read, and one that we've got posted to our website states that, your vitamin A is 7 times higher in grass-fed beef than there, and about 3 times higher in vitamin E. Is that what you're finding as well?
Absolutely. These are very consistent with the numbers I see. And I think it's an interesting discussion to have and you're right, the price is a little bit more and you don't produce as much, but maybe people should just eat a little less meat, but better meat, right?
Right.
And that's I think a very reasonable approach too. I know that obviously there's a lot of push for veganism and vegetarianism, and those movements are, going on. And that'll work for some people, but for some people, I think we need more of a reasonable balance, right?
Yes.
They're not just going to dive into this kind of thing. And I think having a better product, but a little less of it is a very reasonable path forward. And the stuff you're talking about, soil regeneration, I don't know this stuff well, but I try and read about it. I think it's absolutely a fascinating concept. People aren't, you got the animal ethics, which is a big deal to a lot of people. I think it's a big deal.
It is.
The nutritional content, which is, what I study the most. And then you've got this whole ecological carbon footprint and these kinds of things, which are very important coming together. And I think consumers are starting to think about some of this stuff a lot now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the job that we have in front of us, is explaining, those 3 characteristics or value propositions to the consumer, why we do the things we do. And, if that ecological benefit that we supply by maintaining our grasslands so that we have diversity with different wildlife. I know on my ranch, we have like striped pipits, and species at risk, virginous hawks, and several other, species that we're trying to maintain and keep here. So, and I think that, we as people would really miss those animals if we didn't have them here, and it would really throw everything out of balance accordingly. So, but the choices go beyond that, right? Because, meat's only one thing that in your diet. So there's so many other things, but like your conversation earlier, it just brings awareness so that maybe you start making some choices on some other things as well.
And that's kind of my earlier days with Mark Schatzker. What was going on here is we had this set up at the University of Toronto, where local farmers, smaller farmers, could just drop off some samples and I'd analyze them. We're slow, it wasn't the focus of the lab. And then, like I said, I always got to get a control group, and people don't think about that, right? If they bring me a weird cut of meat, I'm going to give them a number and then, milligrams, whatever. They're not going to understand it. So I got to go find a conventional thing. And it was fun, but it was hard sometimes. But the other thing we were doing is, I would just send the results to the farmer, and labeling is a big issue. It's complicated in this business. And, and I would say, well, there's a result. You can quote me if you want, right? And here's your result, and here's your result compared to a standard thing. And so the farmers, I think, enjoyed that, and they were able to, use that a bit at the markets. And then we started working with some local chefs and showing them the differences. And I think they were actually quite impressed with the size of the difference. But it seems to me, and I think you've alluded to a little bit, one of the big issues that you've hit on here is educating the public, right? There's a lot of, there's a documentary on last week that this says this, and my cousin says that, and what's real and what's not. And then even having standards for grass-fed beef, there's a little bit of a disagreement in the communities, and especially across species, how you would do that, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it is challenging. So this information that you're gathering in that, are you taking it anywhere in the university or taking it out? Do you see this getting, let's say, integrated into school systems so that people understand what, pastured meats are and that?
Yeah. So, it's kind of goes in waves up and down, where we do a little bit more of it. And then I gave a couple of talks like in Alberta, and I've given talks to some other places in the US about this. And so, I guess the problem with me is I'm a scientist. I'm not a public health person, and not even that good with people sometimes to some extent, right? So I'm not the messenger, right? I just collect the data and hopefully get it out there with people. But things like this, and now I've got enough data that what I need to do is, and this is a tricky one, I want to do that study we were talking about where we replace all of somebody's animal food supply with pasture meats versus conventional meats, and kind of swap them around and measure things in them.
Right.
And that'll take time. A study like that, it's not clear, should that be funded by the agricultural industry? Should that be funded by the health industry? Or it's a bit tricky because funding comes into certain silos, if I can call it, and they don't cross that well. But slowly going forward, and I'm seeing things, pop up here. Even I haven't checked it, but there's fast food commercials saying that they're serving grass-fed beef in their products, right?
Right.
So things are going, and I'm not going to be the messenger. I'd love to come up and meet people and give little talks and show the data, but I don't know how to do the public health kind of thing. So
yeah. Well, sure. In your talks, you'll find somebody that is, that liaison that can hopefully get more of this information out there for sure.
How do you get it across to your consumers or your clients?
I'm not that great on social media, and unfortunately, and it's never been my forte and never my desire to do it. I love spending my time with my cattle and also working on the business, working with different retailers and that kind of stuff. We're really relying on the conversation that exists out there to a large degree. And we do share information, from different regenerative agriculture people and, some of this data. Our website, I think, is very detailed in terms of talking about what we do, how we do it. We've got some studies on there that illustrate what we're talking about here from a fatty acid profile perspective. I've given lots of talks, like, when we started in health food stores. So lots of times they would have a little evenings where people could come in and listen to us. So I've done, lots of little conversations like that to get things going. But I think we're, more and more people are understanding that, and we're just relying on that. So it's about our labeling and packaging that we're doing those kind of things. So are you? What do you have on? I've seen some of them on your website. It says grass-fed beef on it. Yeah.
But if I went into a store, and
Yep.
saw your product. Is the store got a separate section with your products? Is it labeled or?
Well, it depends. I mean, we do, like for example, one retailer would have the commodity beef and their poultry and that, and then we would have a section that would just have, it's all labeled top grass beef. So that's our brand name, and it's got on there grass fed, free range, never confined to a feedlot, never given grain. Those aspects are all on there. So we're basically, the consumer has to understand the value of grass fed to some degree. We don't go in detail, and we can't, it's really challenging. I feel bad for the average consumer nowadays, is because, there's so many different food choices for them. And to investigate each different food individually to find out what they're about. I mean, don't ask me a lot about poultry and what their omega-3 content is, or their ratio, or, how it's processed. My focus has been raising beef. And so I just can't imagine. I come from a farm, and I've raised a lot of these animals, and we've grown the grains, and I have a good understanding, but times are changing so fast. Things are changing, the way it's processed, the way it's put together. It's just so challenging for the consumer nowadays to really fully understand what it is. But that is one of our biggest challenges that we face right now, is educating the consumer on what it is that we do. Yeah.
And I can almost one up you there. One of the problems I have, so I'm in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto downtown. And, somebody in Ontario will view this and send me an email saying, hey, I'm a grass-fed farmer 80 kilometers from you. Duh.
Yeah.
How do you not know about me? Right.
Right. Yeah.
I have no idea. It's just, you don't know about me. I don't know about you. We're not getting these networks together to sometimes to share these conversations as much as we should be. I think it's a bit tricky because the grass-fed beef or these products in the Faculty of Medicine at U of T, it does. If you ask people to say, what are the people in the Faculty of Medicine doing, they wouldn't say analyzing animal, fatty acid content. But it does have a connection. Like I said, the brain is full of omega-3s, and we've been very interested in these products and supplying the brain with omega-3s. But we just don't have the networks. Like, you probably haven't been to the Faculty of Medicine at U of T, or maybe not even to the University of Calgary, right? And they don't come out and see you either. So we gotta break that. And maybe what Amber's setting up here today is a bit of a start on that, right? By having these conversations out there and getting this stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, I sure appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and share with us, what you do and all this important research. It's really good in my community to have that support and backup and understanding of these things. So really want to thank you for that. Do you have anything other than this study that you're wanting to do? Is there anything else that you're looking at doing?
Well, I've got a good group, and we've got a lot of different things going on. And I guess one of the things we're really interested in that connects to this a little bit is we're interested in finding how much omega-3s you need, and to some ridiculously precise level. Like I said, beef isn't going to replace salmon, but the oceans have their own issues, right? And fish farming, and people don't realize this either. But even some fish farming, if you feed your fish corn in a farm, it's a commodity chicken. You know what I mean? So it changes a lot, right? And people don't see this, and it can be labeled organic and it looks all nice, but the composition can quite change, and there's only so much fish in the ocean. But once we can figure out how much we need, then we can start having conversations about what's enough. And I think that would be a really interesting approach.
Yeah.
But while I've got you here, if I can ask you another one, is just in terms of future trends, if you could speculate a little bit on where you see the markets going with grass-fed or pasture-raised meats. And am I using those terms correctly?
Yeah.
Do you interchange grass-fed and pasture? Yeah,
we do. We label everything grass-fed. we don't label it grass-fed, grass-finished, only because we only have so much label space to put on there. But we do get questioned on that quite a bit. Well, are your animals ever fed grain? Because there is so much confusion out there where some people claim that their animals, well, my cows eat grass, but they just, don't tell you that they also eat a large portion of grain throughout a certain period of time to finish them and that. Yeah, so we're kind of restricted on how much we have on there. So we basically refer to it as grass-fed beef is what we do. So, but in terms of trend, I mean, like I said, we've got the consumers changing. I think they're getting more understanding with the environment being so much at the forefront. I think as we communicate and share with people our story of how we're managing our cattle on the land versus confining them to a feedlot where, you have nutrient concentration in one area that gets washed away into our water systems, et cetera. Whereas here we're keeping all those nutrients on the land and building more soil as a result of it. I think that, more and more people are going to understand that. When we start talking more about regenerative agriculture, that's drawing more attention to something that supports the economy. And I know that the plant-based movement is, something that's all of a sudden, taken a hold to some degree. Man, we're definitely not against plants. Our animals eat them. We're supportive of it. It's unfortunate, though, that a few data points get skewed in this whole thing that all of a sudden it's considered healthy, even though you look at some of the labels, especially as it relates to, any meat-based where they're trying to mimic meat. I mean, you look at those nutritional labels, you look at the ingredient deck, you need a dictionary to be able to pronounce any of them. It's almost impossible. So, I think you alluded to diversity, in your diet, having a lot of diversity, just like our land has a lot of diversity, our animals end up with that in it. And, I think that the more you talk about that to people, you're going to understand it. So I think the grass-fed movement is going to continue. There are some larger chains that are starting to get on board. We're into, more retail chains that are, larger in that. And then, you see down in the United States that they've been at this for a little while longer than what we are. And we tend to follow behind the United States probably about 7 to 10 years. And they've seen exponential growth down there in their grass-fed markets. So I do see, that things are going to get better and better as time goes on. And, for us, I'm hoping to illustrate that, one of the biggest challenges that we had when we first started the business was our mind. I had raised our animals in confinement, feeding them grain. And when it came to thinking of just feeding them a forage diet throughout their whole entire life, I couldn't get my head wrapped around it. What about in the wintertime when it gets so cold? And then we learned that, if we harvest our, the forages at their nutritional peak in the summertime and put them in different formats and feed those through the wintertime, those animals are able to get through those winter. So even for myself, it was a real paradigm shift to get my mind wrapped around that this is possible. So I'm hoping that, with Topgrass Cattle Company, we can illustrate that you can raise these animals in an environment based with just forages and not place them into confinement and keep these animals out on the land. And that we're going to get more and more people, farmers, producers, incorporating regenerative agricultural practices as a part of this whole thing. And then the consumer equation, as they become more educated and understanding these things will grow as well. So I'm optimistic about the future. I'm hoping that, we move more in this direction. I think it's what we need to do from an environmental perspective. And if we have more people consciously choosing, these products that we're producing and other similar products, maybe we can lower that omega-6 ratio that you're looking to do a research on somewhere down the road.
And lastly, what kind of cows do you have? What breed?
Well, we have a mix. We don't discriminate between breeds in the sense of, what they have to offer. We find that there's a much difference within a breed as there is between breeds. So what we're really looking for is special characteristics within that breed. And we're looking for more moderate frame animals that are easy fleshing, that do well on forages. We're using, DNA mapping and things like that to identify animals that have higher marbling capability in them so that they have a higher propensity towards marbling, which lends to a better eating experience in that. So it's about finding that animal. Having said that, The Angus breed is a huge breed in North America, and we have so many animals to choose from there. So we're probably marketing 80% of our animals are Angus. Yeah.
That's neat. So I've analyzed some Angus, and we've had people here even trying Wagyu and all these fun things.
Right. Yeah.
The last thing I'll say on this kind of thing is with the marbling is when these animals are grass fed, you to a certain extent, you don't need my lab. You can see the difference in the color of the fat, right?
Right.
Yeah. When I extract the fats, fat is usually like a white paper, a little creamy. These things can almost be greenish brown. It's really remarkable to see when you do that. And visually, you can kind of, if you get the hang of it, you can tell that this animal's grass raised. It really shows up remarkably.
Yeah, it's really cool. I sure appreciate your time, Richard.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. I'm looking at that barn out there behind you, and it'd be great to be able to pop out there. We'll have to get Amber to keep hosting some conferences for us, or
that's right.
Things up.
Well, I thank you for your time, and look forward to connecting sometime soon.
Likewise.
Okay. Bye, Richard.